The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. I'm David Pasqualone, and welcome to this week's bonus episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the David R. Edwards story. David is a former accountant, now author, and in this episode, he's going to go through his life story, what he's learned, coming from a home where alcoholism negatively impacted and broke his family. Then his mother got remarried to another alcoholic, and you're going to see where that went. And then he talks about his journey of getting in over $100,000 debt, bankruptcy. He talks about changing our relationship with money, changing our thought and the way we process and look at our careers. And then he goes into how we can become the captain of our own destiny. So check out this remarkable episode. Please like our podcast, give it a 5-star review and wherever you're listening. And if for some reason you can't give us a 5-star review, please write me at davidpasqualone.com and tell me why so I can fix it before you put it public. So that's it. I'm David Pasqualone. This is David R. Edwards, and enjoy the show. Hey, Dave, how are you today?
Hi, I'm really good. Thank you.
Man, I am so excited for this episode. I just told our listeners a little bit about you and what to expect, but I know there's a whole lot more. So let's just jump right into your story. As we discussed, you're going to start from your birth. Where were you born? What was your family like? And then you bring us through the significant events to where you are today, the highs, the lows, the really lows, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautifuls. So at this time, David, thank you for being with us, and please share your story.
Thank you. It's not often we get to share our stories, is it? But I'm grateful for the opportunity. And I hope that it's helpful to your listeners, to your audience. I think that's the beauty of having a story, is if somebody can learn something from it, if they can receive some hope because of it. And I think that makes the story worth living, frankly. So I'll start way back, and I'm 60. I'll be 62 on Monday.
Congratulations. It was my birthday this week too, so we're very close in date.
Well, okay, congratulations. That's fun. So we're Pisces, right? But that doesn't make any difference. But for some people, that's a big deal.
Yep. I just interviewed a gentleman who was an astrologer for 50 years, and we were discussing that. And I didn't even realize there's a difference between the Chinese and the Indian calendar. So on one, you and I would be a Pisces, and on the other one, we'd be something else. I don't remember what it is, but it actually varies based on the calendar of what nation you're following. So I don't typically follow any of that, but it's crazy that you just brought that up. And that's exactly what we discussed a couple of days ago.
Well, there you go. Well, it's nice having that broad kind of base of knowledge and understanding, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. The more you know, the more you can take the good and spit out the bad and use it to glorify God. So there's truth in everything. The problem is saying a lot perverts it, Like I'll joke around. I heard a gentleman say a long time ago, I'll never forget. He said, rat poison is 95% good food. Problem is that 5% is what's going to kill you. So lies and half-truths are just like that. There's always a grain of truth to get people to believe it, but how much of the percentage is just flat out lie and poison?
There you go. And that can bite you.
Yeah. Well, let's go back. Where were you born? Where did your life start?
I was born in Yakima, Washington. So the state of Washington here on the West Coast.
Oh, yeah. I lived out in Cedar Woolley, Mount Vernon area for 3 years. So I know exactly where you're from. Yeah.
There you go. And, we were a very typical family. My parents met in high school and they fell in love and got married, started having children. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was in construction, so he did contractor. This will kind of date things a little bit, but we used to not have sheetrock. right? So every house for the last 50 years plus has been built using sheetrock. But before that, they didn't have it. And so they did what they call lath and plaster. So I had some intimate experience with lath and plaster. When I was 19, I served a mission for my church, and I was in southern France in a house that was about 300 years old. And one night, when was it, in the morning, I guess it was. So we got up early to study, and we heard a crash upstairs in this house. So we went up to what was our bedroom, and the ceiling had fallen in. And in those days, what they did was they laid out lath, which is strips of wood. And then there was a skilled trade of putting plaster on that lath, so that you had kind of, walls that you could put pictures on and paint and do all that kind of stuff with it. It added some insulation and soundproofing and all that jazz. But anyways, this was probably 100 pounds of plaster and wood and stuff that had crushed down, and, we would have been harmed for sure had we been there at that moment. But anyway, so lath and plaster, that's what my dad did. And we traveled. We went to where the work was. And so we lived in California. We went back to Washington. He was always doing jobs and work. And then he started doing, different kinds of work and construction. And we ended up in Alaska. And he worked up in there in several different places. I think I went to 7 elementary schools. And but when I was fairly young still, we had finished a job in Fairbanks, Alaska, came down. We had a little bit of money for the first time probably in our lives. And I was a little kid. What do you know about money and how things are going? But, we lived in a trailer, and I think lived fairly modestly, had old cars, and but we were okay. I think we were pretty typical of a lot of families in those days. And but anyway, so we got back, and my dad started drinking and changed his personality. He wrecked a truck and then wrecked another one, and then he made a big mistake, and my mom divorced him. And I don't think I realized how angry that made me. You don't think about it at that age, but I was 10 years old, 1970, and I was kind of angry. I had quite a temper. My mom took us 3 boys. We moved into a little apartment. I remember getting mad at one of my brothers, or maybe both of them, and we had these horseshoes. You ever played horseshoes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we had these rubber horseshoes, supposed to be safer, but I managed to throw it at my brother, and it poked a hole in the door in the apartment. So it was pretty solid stuff, evidently. Anyway, so we dealt with that. My mom dated and found another man that she loved, and they got married. So we found out that this man was an alcoholic, and I mean a full-on alcoholic. And my mom was a social drinker. She didn't really want him to drink that much, and he recognized it was a problem, but he couldn't. I mean, he was totally addicted. And I remember mom came to me one night, to us 3 boys, we in a room with a bunk bed and another bed, and she said, "We might have to leave suddenly. It might be in the middle of the night. And if we do have to do that, you need to be quiet. You need to not fuss about the stuff that we leave behind. You need to, get a garbage bag and get your clothes and something else, and then we're going to go." And that's kind of the point that was at. And that was kind of sobering, for now a young teenager. But we didn't. We didn't have to do that. And but they continued to struggle and work on, his addiction. And one day the missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints showed up. And they knocked on the door, and they'd knocked on the door before. And my mom had always said, no, we're not interested. I was not brought up religious at all. I think we went to a couple of churches just randomly from time to time, but they said yes, my mom and my stepdad, and it really was the beginning of a complete change in their lives. They studied, they prayed, studied scriptures, received a witness that it was true. And a part of what we are taught as members of that church is to avoid alcohol, tobacco, to eat a healthy diet, balance, fruits and vegetables, whole grains. And, you know, that was given in about, I don't know, 1830s, mid 1830s. Before that was kind of scientifically known. And it changed their lives. And I could see in them over, you know, the next several months, a change in their outlook and a change physically. And it probably took Dan, who's my stepdad, about 6 months, is what he told me, before he really had his last drink ever in his life. And but obviously that's going to make a huge difference. He's happier at home, happier at work. And I'm proud of him because he probably spent much of the next 10, 15 years helping other people who had similar problems, right? He had Alcoholics Anonymous meetings at his home, and he just was reaching out to let people know that this may seem impossible. And at this particular moment in time, it is impossible perhaps, but you stick with it and you keep trying, and with faith and support, you can overcome this and you can move on and you can have a better life. And that was a great example to me. When they joined that church, I remember very clearly saying to them, this is good for you. I mean, I went to their baptism. I said, but don't talk to me about church. Don't expect me to go to church. I don't care about that kind of stuff. It's not me. You know, I was 13. I knew everything. And I was trying to be my own person. I had hair then. It was down to my shoulders. and, you know, it was the 70s, you know, and you had long hair and a mustache if you were physically capable of it. But I, of course, ended up joining the church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it changed my life just like it did theirs. I didn't have any addictions to overcome, but having faith in God and understanding who I was from an eternal perspective and what my potential is as a child of God and an heir of God completely changed my outlook in life, and it changed my direction in life. It has been the most pronounced thing that has happened in my entire life. And I'm very grateful for that. It changed it enough that it was about 3 years later, 3.5 years maybe, I took the money I'd saved after graduating from high school and working, and I served the mission for 2 years on my own dime, trying to teach the gospel of Jesus Christ to anybody who would listen. And that was another marvelous experience.
Now, during this time, so your mom and dad, your biological mom and dad got divorced, and you're in Washington, but you traveled different places. Once you left, did your mom stay in Washington? I might have missed that. Or did you guys go to Utah, or where were you at that point?
No, my mom and my stepdad stayed in Washington. He was an engineer at Boeing, and he worked there for 41 years before he retired.
Okay, yeah,
so
Boeing
stayed there.
Yeah, so Boeing's massive in Seattle and that area. Okay. And then you and your 3 brothers are all watching this change happen, and your mother and your stepfather. What about your brothers? What happened with them? Did they change also? Did they rebel?
Nope.
What happened with them?
No, my older brother, Dan, he and I used to study Eastern philosophy a lot. And again, this was quite popular in that time period. You know, the Beatles were studying with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and transcendental meditation. And, we would read about that stuff. And I wasn't that interested in it either. Or maybe at that age, I wasn't that interested in anything, but vaguely interested in a lot of things, I suppose. Very open, I would say. And I think that's important. But my older brother, so he was 3 years older than me. So he was like 16, 17 during this time period. He went back and lived with our birth father for a little while. And then he moved back up to Alaska. So Danny had just graduated from high school, came back and lived with us. He chose a different path. I think his path was more along meditation and substance use. There were some popular writers at the time. What's the guy's name? Timothy Leary with LSD. And what's the other guy? He was doing peyote as a way to, achieve enlightenment. And he kind of got into that drug scene.
So your older brother went to LSD. You went to the Church of LDS. Where did your third brother go?
He went to the Church of, I don't want anything to do with any of that weird stuff, which he has remained in to this day. It was his birthday Monday. And so I called him up and said, happy birthday. And we don't talk very often. We love each other, but, we're just not like social gadflies or whatever. So he got into construction. He worked, got married, got divorced, got remarried, owned a bar, still owns a bar to this day in rural Michigan. And, my birth father remarried, got divorced, looked around for a long time, finally remarried again, his third one, and it stuck. I mean, till the day he died. It was a beautiful thing for him, and Betty is his wife. And anyways, so yeah, we all, three brothers raised in the same home, really three very different directions.
Well, this is your story, Dave, and we're going to follow your story. So you're in the home, your mom and stepdad get involved in the Church of Latter-day Saints. You see a change in them, and then it also changes you. You accept Christ and following him. So go on from there. Where do you go from that point in life?
So I got home from my mission, and I knew I'd wanted to go to college, and I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so I studied business, which I enjoyed. And I'm not even sure I'm not sure what any of this is interesting at this point, but I studied business. I was working, part-time. I worked in a warehouse. I worked as a mail boy. But I think some things that changed my life was I got a part-time job doing accounting work. So as like accounting clerk, a bookkeeper for a private small business. And I kind of enjoyed that. I didn't really want to be an accountant, I didn't think, but I enjoyed being in the business world. And then a job came up, so I was paying my way through school. I was making $3 an hour, which was not that outrageous at the time. But
Yeah.
I wasn't really making enough, so I was struggling coming up with tuition money and books and all that stuff, and dating and all those kinds of things. And so I saw a job posting making $7 an hour, so I could double my income, literally. And I applied and I got it, and it was like a grant-funded position at a not-for-profit health center in Seattle. And so I started working there, and a lot of things happened in my life, but I was the young buck. Personal computers were pretty new. We got a grant. They got their first personal computer. I had no idea what to do with it. and it cost $7,000 for a PC with like a 14-inch color monitor, 2 5.25-inch floppy drives, no hard drive, the most minimalist of processors, and nothing was standardized back then. You didn't just plug in your USB-C and everything connects and charges. The world was completely different in technology back then. But so they had this computer and they said, well, computers are kind of like for business stuff. So Dave, you're the young buck. And not that I knew anything about computers, but you're young and you love learning stuff. And so I got the manual out and I built our accounts payable system on the computer. Anyways, I met a girl at the Institute of Religion Dance in Seattle at the University of Washington. I wasn't going to university, but they had good dances and new girls to meet. And I had so this was in the mid 80s now, I had my gold lame tie. And we met and we saw each other like every third days, even though we lived 50 miles apart for the next 3 months. And I asked her to marry me because we both knew what we wanted out of life, and we enjoyed each other's company. And 3 months after that, we were married. And that was 36 years ago now.
Wow. And now where was your wife from? Where was she from?
So she was, her dad did lots of different things, but he ended up being an engineer at Boeing as well. So she was born in Idaho, went to Florida, but they ended up in North Seattle. So Seattle is kind of like Everett on the north, Seattle's in the middle, and Tacoma's on the south. And then a whole bunch of other cities in between that, most people have never heard of except Redmond because Microsoft is there, started there. And now they're all over the place. But anyway, so she was in the north end of town and I was living on the south side of town.
Okay. And yeah, you mentioned this and our listeners know who are regulars, but we might have some listeners who are new. And you said, why are we telling all these details? Because what you're doing is you're bringing us in your story of what made you and how God developed you and taught you. So where you are today is a reflection of all these past experiences. So we're just trying to get a good feel for who David is and what made you the man you are. Now, when you were going through life from a teenager, you saw your dad as an alcoholic, your stepdad as an alcoholic. Then you saw, marriage fail, another marriage almost fail. And now you're saying you met a girl and got married 3 months later. That's pretty remarkable. So in your mind, did you still see and know people with healthy marriages? Were you just like, let's see what happens? What was your mindset there? Because a lot of kids are scarred from seeing their parents get divorced.
Yeah. Well, and right, it's so common. I mean, it gets as common as not. So there's a couple of things. I think fundamental, and some people may not like this, but I mean, it is what it is. So, right, there's a difference between truth and belief, because truth is always there. Truth was the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And what I believe changes over time. And so, anyways, so this is what I attribute it to. One is I felt like, my goodness, sorry about that. I felt like I'll go back. So in the church, we are taught that marriage can last beyond the grave, that men and women can be married for time and eternity. So it's not just, I am marrying you because I love you and I'm full of emotion and hormones and let's hook up and see how it goes. It's really about what is the purpose of life. And so the purpose of life from our perspective is that we are trying to become the best people that we can. And that the pattern that God set was Adam and Eve, man and woman, married, having children, teaching them their values and truth as best as they understand it, knowing that they're going to take that, and as soon as they become teenagers, they're going to do what they're going to do with it. but you teach them and you love them unconditionally, and you do your best with each other and with your children, and that this is our legacy, and then this is a pattern for eternal life. Because that's how God set us up to function and to operate. And to think that he would put us here, have us get married, have children, they have children, so you got grandchildren and so on, and then it all just ends and goes away once you're done, with mortality, is not very satisfying, nor does it seem consistent with what we understand. And so when we entered into this relationship, it wasn't until it's inconvenient, or until one of us gets fat, or until, we don't have any money, or until whatever, right? It was really with the sense of knowing that we're human and mortal and flawed and biased and all of those things, that our intent is to be together forever, to learn and grow together, because this is a pattern that will continue on beyond the grave. And they will continue to grow and become more like Heavenly Father and more like him, because he commanded us to be perfect. I mean, and we don't believe that's achievable in mortality, but, we have to look at life as way beyond just this mortal sphere. And so that was the mental model with which we made this commitment and a covenant. And in our church, we call it a temple marriage. So we're married in the temple, which is a three-way relationship. You got like a triangle. You got yourself and your spouse as equal partners. We had different roles most of the time, and sometimes we have the same roles, but we recognize that we're different. Men and women are designed different. But then there's a third party in this relationship, and that is God. And God shares truth and light and wisdom with us, and a vision of what we are striving to become, working together. And so the hope is that this creates a stronger bond. And when struggles come, so we've been bankrupt, for example. I left the job I had been at for 11 years. We'd been very successful. And when I wondered what to do next, I looked for work. I got coaching. I could not find work, that was in my profession. I had been a chief financial officer for a long time. Over a decade, I'd been a chief operating officer, and I just couldn't find work. And I was a little pickier by that point, because I knew that my work had to satisfy my desire to serve other people as well. And I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but for me, it was really important that what I do 8, 10, 12 hours a day at work, because when you're in a senior role, sometimes you got to put the hours in, or when you're an entrepreneur, or like a podcaster, and you got to put the hours in, you got to put the time in. And so it's just what you have to do. And so if I'm going to put that kind of effort into it, it's got to have some higher meaning. And that's important for me. And I learned that early in my career, but the hard way. Anyway, so I couldn't find work. I went to Africa, which is a wonderful experience, commissioned a hospital, met some lovely people who are still friends to this day. But I just wasn't able to make a living, and we had to file bankruptcy. We had this much debt and this much income, and a few people said they're not going to be patient with us anymore, and we were advised to file for bankruptcy, which was a terrible, tragic thing and against my values, but we didn't feel there was any other choice. And 3 months later, that was August, September, October, November. In November, I had 2 job offers making $130,000 a year.
Yeah, totally different situation in just a few short weeks, right?
I mean, I could have, had those jobs 2 years ago, and life would have been completely different. We would have paid off our debts. We learned stuff in the process. We had too much credit card, blah, blah, blah.
No, blah, blah, blah. That's what this show is about. I want you to go through the blah, blah, blah. So what did you learn through that process that our listeners can learn from for you now and avoid that pain?
Well, we had been in a very fortunate circumstance. So from, when I was like, we struggled financially, but we had enough. We were okay. I was at this point pretty committed to working for not-for-profits. So I knew I was never going to be rich. But we got ourselves into a situation that we were in a growing company that as they grew, were able to pay me a little more money every year. Now, it wasn't just like a 3% inflationary raise. It was, wow, we offered this new service. We created this new thing. We had these wonderful outcomes. There's more money in the bank, so we're going to pay our employees more. And so I was growing my income, and my income was going up every year. So we thought, well, this is normal now, right? This is how life is. And we had that for 11 years. And so we got into a habit of everybody wanted to give me credit cards because, you've got a good credit rating, you pay your bills, you have a good income. And so we got more and more, we was making more money. We had more credit cards. We carried balances on them. We kind of knew somewhere in the back of our mind that we should pay those off, but there was always, braces for the kids, or we needed a bigger car, or we wanted, and I think you start to lose to distinguish between what is needed and what is wanted. That's one lesson learned. You start thinking, every year I'm going to make more money, so having debt is not a big problem because I'm going to have more money next year and I can carry that debt now. And I think those were really important lessons learned. And we decided we didn't want to put things off. We would carry, car loans and other kinds of things. And so then when kind of that world came crashing down financially, our marriage was strong, right? Because we kind of talked about that a little bit. And despite these now struggles we were having, we faced them together because we knew that our relationship is more important than any externalities going on in our lives. And so that was never a question for either of us, which I think was a huge help. But still, you've got all this debt, you've got cars, you've got credit cards, and you've got this habits that you've developed that we had to change. And so when it was fairly obvious, even with coaching and whatnot, that I wasn't going to find work locally. And again, our organization had a fantastic reputation. We've been very successful. But I wasn't able to translate into the next great thing. And so we had to sell cars, and we got cars that were much less expensive, not as new, not as nice. They still got us around. Instead of having 2 cars, you go down to 1. We tried to pay our credit cards, but the kind of work I was able to find was interim or temporary, or it caused me to travel. So when I went to Africa, that was a marvelous experience. Again, all kinds of positives there. And at the end of that year, they said, we want you to sign a 3-year contract to bring your family over and establish here and really get this hospital off the ground, which I was tempted. And we thought about it. We prayed about it. We had 2 daughters in high school, blonde hair, blue eyes. And we just couldn't get a good feeling about it. We just, in Nigeria where I was, and I love the Nigerian people, but in the newspaper, every couple of weeks it was this person who's a Caucasian was captured by rebels and, held for ransom, or, a bus full of hooligans drives through town and shoots people, or whatever it happens to be. The governor of this state was caught in New York with his 3 wives and $2 million in his suitcase. And this was just normal life. And my family was not comfortable with it. So we decided not to do it. But anyways,
yeah,
I
and
think those are
understandably,
important lessons learned. So
Understandably so. And when you're doing this, so basically, if I'm hearing you, you learn to live within your means, buy needs, not wants. You downsized, going from 2 cars to 1. You cut the unnecessary expenses wherever you could. And then you're evaluating your full-on life situation. Like, is this where we belong? Do we move to another career? So is that am I interpreting that properly from what you said?
yeah, I think that's very accurate. It's very accurate.
So how did you, oh yeah, keep going. I want to know, how did you get out of that financial hole? And if you don't mind me asking, how deep were you in and what year was it?
So this was 2005, 2006 is when it, was really at its worst, I guess. We filed bankruptcy in August of 2006.
Okay. And do you mind me asking, how deep in debt were you? Hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands? Where were you?
No, over $100,000 in credit card debt alone.
Wow. Okay. So that's significant debt. That's significant debt.
That's significant debt. I mean, and you look back at it now and you go, how in the world could I have done that? But we did.
So the bankruptcy, explain, because some people, I keep using this quote, but it keeps coming up and I keep butchering it. I need to go research it. But Albert Einstein made a quote and he said something like, the thinking that brought you to the bad place, it's going to take 10 times that of good thinking. You can't just use crappy thinking and continue in crappy thinking and expect to get out of your hole, right? So, and that's totally a paraphrase. Albert Einstein didn't use the word crappy. But what I'm saying is, what was the thinking and thought process and the action steps you took to get out and then to stay out? So maybe it was filing bankruptcy. Some people don't even know what that means. So explain bankruptcy and explain the steps of how you got out and how you stayed out.
So when you file bankruptcy, basically you make a record of, it's a legal process. You find a lawyer who does bankruptcy work and they work with the courts. And in the short version of it is basically your debts are erased. So it's kind of like repentance, right? Your debts get erased. You don't have to pay them anymore. And there's a very specific process you have to follow, and it takes several months to go through that. But they call it bankruptcy protection. And then people, because, at that point, people are calling you every day saying, hey, you got to pay on this credit card. Hey, you got to pay on this bill. You got to do this. You got to do that. And we owned our home. It wasn't fully paid, but they typically won't make you lose your home, in a bankruptcy. Now, this was a modest house in a modest neighborhood, kind of middle class, I guess. And so it wasn't anything fancy. I don't know what happened if you have $1 million house. If you had equity in it, right, they'd probably make you sell it, use that equity to pay off debtors. But it's, there's a balance sheet. I mean, I was an accountant for a long time, right? So you got debits, that's what you got, and you got credits, that's what you owe. And so, they're out of balance. And so they take whatever assets you've got, though, that are reasonable. And like if you owe money on a car, you got to turn your car in. And, they get the car back and they don't get any more money from you. And then you got to figure out what you're going to do. But like credit card debts or unsecured debts is what those are called. Any kind of unsecured debt gets written off. It's a bad debt on the business books. And then when the bankruptcy is finalized, you're kind of starting with a clean slate. And, most of your credit cards that you've had in the past have all been, I guess, obviously, but maybe not, they've been canceled. You can't draw on those anymore. And you're really starting from scratch, but with a really sucky credit rating. There's that technical term again, a crappy credit rating. I mean, like 510 or something. And, you can't get anything. Now, there are people who specialize in working with people who've gone through bankruptcy, who have really poor credit. And and again, this is just economics, but when you have really poor credit, you have to pay more for anything that you want to do. So if you just cannot live without a credit card, so you want to have a credit card for whatever reasons, for mileage, for, spreading things out, for whatever your reason is, for convenience, because you don't like to have a lot of cash around or whatever, then they'll give you a credit card. There's people that specialize in that, but they're going to give you a small credit line and they're going to charge you an absolutely outrageous rate of interest. So we got a good job, 3 or 4 months too late perhaps, and all of a sudden, so we had some income coming in. Instead of living on charity, basically, the hand to mouth, basically, we got some help from our church. But basically, we lived on what I could make. We cooked all of our own food. We never ate out, all those kinds of things. And we didn't have any extras, and we didn't buy stuff just because it was there. You just really live a very, very basic life. And that's okay, frankly, because you know what? While we hated going through bankruptcy, we loved each other. And our children loved us still, right? And by this point, they were teenagers. They knew that we were, fundamentally flawed anyway, but they knew that we loved them no matter what. And as we taught our children growing up, stuff will happen. It sucks when it happens to you, but stuff will happen. Plan on it. And then you've got to focus on the basics, the fundamentals, the foundations, and then rebuild from there. And so it doesn't matter what happens, it matters what you do with it. And if you called up my 35-year-old daughter today and you said, did he really say that? She would absolutely say ad nauseum. and so, repetition is not a bad thing. So anyways, we went to get a car because we had to have a car. We owned one car that we had, that was paid off, an older car. But we had to have another car because I was going to Alaska for my job. And our oldest daughter wanted to finish high school, for 6 months where we were, which made perfect sense. And so we went to the car place and we said, hey, here's our credit rating way down here. And we need a car though. And it can't be a fancy car, but maybe an old minivan or something that's just practical. And so they said, we'd love to sell you that car. And we're going to charge you, these weren't their words, more than somebody who has a good credit rating. And your interest rate, where it would be like 6% for somebody else, is going to be 18%. You know what? That's life. And that's the price you pay for not managing your credit and not managing your financial life.
Yeah, and let's break this down for the listeners, because we have listeners in over 90 countries actively, and we have listeners of all ages and demographics. Just within the United States alone, there's so many different income classes and different backgrounds and different cultures. So let's back things up for a second. If you take a basic accounting class, there's debits and credits. And this is what our listeners need to understand. Just like David, just like me, just like every person that's part of the financial system, they purposely deceive you. The system is made to deceive. Now, we are responsible for our actions. Dave, I believe you'd agree with that. But the system is made to deceive. For instance, Dave, in accounting, what's a debit?
A debit is what you own. It's an asset.
Exactly. But what do they call what you use to purchase with your bank account? A debit card.
Yep.
So right off the bat, they're confusing you what a debit and a credit is. Okay. And a credit card, they make it sound positive. Like I have a credit card, where that's just shoving you in debt. Then you have, what's your credit score? That's not a credit score. It's a debt score. Totally a debt score. Because if you are a millionaire and pay for everything in cash, you are very creditable as a person when it comes to finances. But if you don't use a credit card and take out loans, they won't even rent you a car when you could take money out of your pocket and buy a car. So it is a debt system. They, at every angle and approach, they convince people that it's safe and fun. Buy it now, pay later. That is a lie from the devil. The Bible says the borrower is servant to the lender. And like Dave says, if you went with good credit to buy a vehicle today, you're probably going to pay, because the economy is in such a trash hole right now, you could pay 0% and you're just paying payments for 60 months or 72 months, or maybe you're paying 1.75%. But because David and his wife had to file for bankruptcy, they're paying 18%. If you calculate out the difference in a payment, that is a massive difference.
It is.
Then when you go to buy a home, you could get a 2.75% interest rate for 30 years, say roughly today, if you have good credit. But if you have bad credit, you could be paying 30%. There's no way to dig out of these holes, people. So listen to David and learn from his life and example, because when you dig in that hole, sometimes you can't get out financially unless you take hard, drastic, different measures. But like I tell my kids all the time, you're gonna learn the lesson, but do you want to do it the easy way or the hard way? So David, you learned the hard way, and he's taken the time to share this with us. So ladies and gentlemen, please be smart, be wise, do not go in debt, do everything you can to avoid debt. You know, we can get into, well, what about leveraging money? I heard rich people say they leverage money. Yeah, but they're already rich and they're out of debt. They're using a debt to buy a house at 2% so they can invest their money and make 10%. That's their situation. If you're eating mac and cheese in little like Vienna sausages because that's all you can afford, you're in a different situation. You need to look at your situation, not the anomaly. So yeah, so Dave, I get really passionate about this because there's so many people getting wrapped up in debt. I don't even want to know what the latest statistic is, but it was like the average person it was $16,000 in credit card debt, plus medical debt, plus car, plus house. And that was like 5 years ago. I don't even want to know what it is today, but that's a huge, real thing. So that's why the more you share with how you got out, the better. So you filed for bankruptcy, you curbed your spending, you lived within your means. So to finish the story with that minivan, you got that at 18%. Did you go ahead and just make the payments for 50 months, or did you try to pay it down early?
Well, we had a better job, right? So we were fortunate. We felt fortunate, and I was interested in working with people who aren't like me. So I don't know about you, but on my screen, it looks like I'm this glowing white face. I am very white. And so I loved working in Africa because my friends in Nigeria are very black. I mean, so black that it was hard to take a picture because, you know, it's just hard to distinguish. And so, you know, it was so very different from any situation I'd been in before. But, and it was a fun story. When I first got there with some of people I was working with, and I was looking for my church, or a branch of my church over there. And I couldn't find one because addresses are, you know, this was the city of, well, it was in a little rural area just outside of a city of 5 million people, roughly. There are no social security numbers, you know, and there are names on the big roads, but then there'd be a little road and there's all these huts and shanties and buildings. And so it was go 2 blocks down, and there's a building with a red door, and go 3 doors over and around the corner. And that's, you know, where you're trying to get to. And those are the kind of directions you got. So, and this was, you know, earlier days of the internet. And so things weren't quite as, you know, Google Maps or, you know, Bing or whatever you're into. And so I couldn't find a church. So some of my friends were Baptists. And so I said, well, there's a huge Baptist church on the corner. Let's just go there on this Sunday. So we went to this church, and it was a lovely experience. I don't know about other Baptists. I've never been to another Baptist church, but they said, anybody new today? And this was a very large congregation. And so I stood up, and some of my other people, and they all welcomed us. They said, welcome to our church. And then they paused the entire meeting. And it wasn't just us, there were some other newer people there. And everybody around us shook our hand and welcomed us and said, we're glad to see you here. It was very wonderful and very welcoming. And it was a lovely experience. Anyway, so I'll go back to this. So then, so we got the van, and our daughter graduated. And so I came down that next summer, and we moved, my family up to Alaska. And I worked at a tribal health consortium there. So this was an Alaska Native group of Alaska Native governments. So these are federally recognized tribal groups. And they took their healthcare authority and the little bit of money they get for that, combined it and created this not-for-profit consortium. And I was able to work with these wonderful Alaska Native people to understand their culture better and provide something that I was convinced was really important, which is looking at your healthcare as a system that revolves around you instead of you around them. Because the traditional model is, when is my doctor available? Well, it's 2 months from now on Tuesday at 8 a.m. And if you can't make it, that's too bad, because you have to flex around them. And anyways, and that's a whole nother long story. But anyway, so I enjoyed working and having that experience there. And we loved living in Alaska, frankly. Our younger daughter graduated from high school there. And we did that for about 4 years. I don't know if I want to go into this or not, but if there's anybody, people work, right? And some people might be employers, maybe small businesses or larger businesses, right? So I'll give you a clue. Our board had adopted a policy of racial discrimination. And so they said, if you're a Native American or an Alaska Native, you get preference in hiring, firing, promotion. And in fact, if you're not an Alaska Native or Native American, we won't promote you. And when I'd hired on there, the CEO at the time, who changed, but who hired me as the vice president of finance, I said, I'm almost done with my master's degree in healthcare administration, and I've been in finance for a long time, which is fine. I enjoy it and I can add value here. And I had some tremendous success with that there as well. But I really want to get into operations. I feel like that's where I will actually be the most service, as an administrative role over clinical services. And I don't know what that looks like, here, but that's my career interest. And he said, absolutely, we would love to help you develop in that. And that's great. Well, we got very busy, as almost always happens. I found out that this CEO who hired me, who used to be the CFO there, had this beautiful management accounting system, which unfortunately, in my first couple of months, I realized this thing is fundamentally flawed. And, that was one of my first challenges to overcome there, was that here's the boss who hired me, and I had to tell him this tool that you developed, which is in a lot of ways very elegant and it ties out nicely, has us millions of dollars. And this was a larger organization, maybe an $80 million organization, I think, at the time. Has us millions of dollars off from where we actually end up. And so it's misleading us. And that was, you had to craft that message very carefully. And we had to revise it. And then I realized that we were doing our accounting wrong, and we were actually losing money, not breaking even. I mean, like millions of dollars losing. And so we had a lot of bad news, and it's like, well, we hired this guy and all this bad stuff is happening.
Now, was the software just written poorly and it was unintentional, or was that a tool used to steal money, basically?
Manipulate. I don't believe it was intentional. I believe he had the best of intentions, but there was fundamental flaws in the logic, and some of the underpinnings of this, many page document, that was produced monthly as a way to communicate to the leadership team and the board, this is how we're doing, and this is the direction that we're moving. And then we made some, in accounting, there are things they call, you think accounting is like black and white, right? You got debits and credits, you got assets and liabilities, you got equity, and you've got all these things that are black and white. But there are things that you have to make estimates about. And in healthcare, the biggest thing is your bad debt. We just talked about bad debt, right? And so and what they call allowances, because healthcare is unique amongst industries in the country and perhaps in the world. Because if you have a podcast, and let's say, I don't know how you make money on a podcast, or if you do, but normally, it's kind of like, if you do this, I'll pay you $10. And then when it comes due, you expect them to pay you $10. But in healthcare, they say, well, I'm going to charge you $50. And this guy is going to pay me $40, and that guy is going to pay me $60, and that guy's going to pay me $20, and this guy's going to pay me $30, but then I'm going to adjust it to $25, and then I'm going to get a kickback of $5 on the back end of it. Or, and it gets very complicated. So accounts receivable is a unique animal in the healthcare world. And so we made some errors in our estimates, which unfortunately took us from making money or barely breaking even to losing millions of dollars a year. And we had to kind of face the reality of that, right? And I think this is a life lesson. It's in business and it's in personal life as well, is that if you have feedback that tells you stuff that's dramatically different than what you think is going on, you better pay attention to that feedback. You better you got to get over your ego. You got to get over your kind of perception of yourself. And you've got to look at the feedback as a way to get a more realistic, accurate perception, either of your financial situation or who you are as a person or the direction you're going, or, whatever it might be. And
I
that
think
was
that's
really important. And I was grateful to be able to, because I'm really honest. I'm just, I don't have any room for facade and gerrymandering and creating false impressions and any of that kind of stuff. I just don't have time for it. I really believe in transparency and integrity. And so two of my fundamental core values. And so I just said, I have no agenda here. I'm new to the organization. Please know where I'm coming from, but this is, in fact, what's going on. And I then had taken our auditors and I got them to corroborate, not like do this and I'll pay you or something, or do this or I'll fire you, or whatever kind of monkey business. It was, I said, this is what I'm seeing. Please look at this and tell me if I'm accurate. And they were able to validate that what I was looking at was accurate. And frankly, some of that was work that they had done that was also not as robust as it maybe could have been. And so I had all these audiences and we had this bad news. But once we got over the bad news, and this is what I like to do, is then you say, so then how do we move forward? Because anytime we're focused on the past, and unfortunately in accounting, it's all in the past, right? And the past is gone. The past is never going to come back to us, right? The only thing we have is today, and how today is going to influence and open up opportunity for our tomorrow. And so what we're able to do is say, here's feedback this has been validated. So it's not just like one source or a one-off or one opinion. It's like, yeah, this looks like this is real. So we have to accept it. We have to adjust our version of reality based upon it. And then we get to have the wonderful place. And I've done a lot of turnaround work in my career. Is you get to say, all right, so that's where we're at. This we feel is pretty solid. So now having this point, where do we want to go? And so you got this point here, and we figure through, I believe, ideally in a collective visioning process, we're going to go from here to here. And then you get to set your path. And then how you're going to get feedback along the way so that you support yourself and you make sure that you're not getting too far off track. Because it's never a straight line, right? We draw graphs and we show these straight lines like, yeah, you're here, you're going to get to there. It's never like that. It's always like this. And so you got to make sure, within a kind of, within a range that you're moving in the right direction, that you're moving towards what you want to become as a person, what you want your business or your organization to be doing and the direction you want to be moving. And you want to do that with as many viewpoints as possible. And so I'm a real fan of not-for-profits because as a not-for-profit, we have money, but we only have money for what it allows us to do, not just to have money. And so what we do is we get to say, we exist for these purposes that are higher than ourselves. And the money then goes to serve that mission and that vision that we've created and to move our programs forward that affects our constituents. And that could be our patients if you're in a healthcare organization, or your clients, or however you look at that, right? Whoever you're serving in whatever role, if you're doing a podcast, right? You get to say, how am I serving my audience? Because that's who you love and who you're serving. And so you get to look at the data of how it affects them, but you have a financial perspective, you have a, an internal perspective, you have the audience perspective, and you might have advertisers or some other perspectives. So you got to balance all of those, and that's all feedback. And it's all a part of looking at your life as an integrated, and hopefully because of your choices and your intent, coordinated whole. And that's a beautiful place to be, because then you're looking forward, which brings hope, and it allows you to grow and expand who you are or your business or whatever, whatever element or aspect of it you're looking for. In the for-profit business world, I'm a fan of what's called a B corporation. B corporations have basically figured out and said, I exist as a for-profit organization, but I recognize that I am not immune from all of the other stakeholders that I affect or that I have an impact on. So that could be your employees, it could be your suppliers, it could be the environment, your community. And so they take this broad, more inclusive perspective and they say, this is what we're about. And we do need to make money. I mean, we're here to make money still, but we do have higher reasons, more reasons, and we're going to account for those, and we're going to be accountable to them and how, they set up their report card or their accountability. And I just think it's a much more sustainable, more joyful, it's more connected to the way the world works and the universe works, a way to look at a for-profit business. So I'm a big fan of that. I've talked for a long time now. And one thing you'll find is I'm very capable of talking a lot. So I would appreciate any direction or guidance or thoughts at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's so many things that you touched on. And for people not familiar with the American tax system, especially at the corporate level, we have the longest, most cumbersome tax law in the world. And it's designed that way on purpose for corruption. Okay. That's just, would you agree, David? Flat out, bottom line, it's complex because people want to be able to manipulate it. So that's why you have these mega corporations and highly elite individuals making a ton of money, but they wrote the law with all the loopholes so they don't pay taxes. So it's pretty corrupt. It's pretty wrong. And it's just the way it is right now. And hopefully it's fixed. But that's the case. So we have the most grayed out tax law in the world. Next is, you talked about the auditors not catching it. That's their entire job. So how long was this going on for before you found it? Like, because I know you were new at the company, but how long was this going on for before their auditors said, yeah, he's right?
I don't know, honestly. And so I was there. I looked back at least a couple of years, and again, you don't want to make this an accounting podcast, but they. Well, I don't, there's a lot of factors here. I don't believe anybody was purposely trying to deceive. I really don't believe that. I believe that you have management that makes certain assertions, and if they aren't tested adequately in the right light, then those things, if auditors aren't being maybe as diligent, those things can be missed. And it's not like there was an intent to do it, but they have a lot of stuff to do in a compressed time frame. And I had been in healthcare for 93, 2003, 13, 14 years at that point. I'd seen a lot of different things. I had a lot of background in it. This CFO was not a healthcare CFO before, right? And so he didn't have that background. He had to learn and do his best with what he had. I think that's one of the reasons why you want to hire, really super bright people. They may not agree with you on everything, and they may not have the same background as you, but that's one of the benefits. And we talk about diversity a lot, and I love diversity, not that I seek diversity necessarily. I love diversity because it is a simple fact. And that's a wonderful thing. And so, appreciate, value, honor the diversity and learn from it. Don't be stuck in your rut and your own little limited mental model and perspectives. Expand that, be open, be curious, be humble. And then diversity becomes this wonderful thing that you can learn from. And so,
100%.
Bringing on new people with different thinking is going to illuminate things that maybe have been wrong, that you're biased on and have been for a long time, maybe your whole life. And that's in it the way that we grow and that we learn and that we become expansive.
Yes, and I agree completely. And I think that's all I've seen in my career in life. It's like, physically, how do you grow physically? Through conflict, through you're pushing at the gym, you're tearing those muscle fibers, you're pushing it, and it brings you to that next level. But then inside of a business or a not-for-profit organization, if you're going to grow, I've never seen an organization grow and thrive without a healthy conflict, a diverse set of views. Because if I ask an accounting department how to run a company, we're screwed. If I ask a sales team how to run a company, we're screwed. If I ask an operations manager how to run the company, we're screwed. You need the balance. And if the salespeople aren't yapping at the operations, hey, produce more, and the operations aren't yelling at sales, hey, go sell more, something's wrong. When you get an operations manager, a sales manager that are buddies, that's usually a stagnant, non-growing company. But when you have people that are kind of slapping each other around in a healthy way, the company thrives. Same thing with accounting, right? So I guess it's just, to me, the story's not about that organization. This is about you. But the gift God gave you to walk into a new company and see it, that's great. But what blows my mind as a businessman is, listen, nonprofit or not, this is the income we got. These are our expenses. Here's our bottom line. If that number was off 1 year, how was it not found? That's what I can't wrap my mind around. I mean, You have the donations, the income, you have the expenses, you overhead, property, plant, equipment, all these things. But at the end of the day, 2 + 2 is 4. So it's hard for me to believe there wasn't something shady going on for
No,
numbers.
really, honestly, I would ask you to trust me on this. This is
Oh,
not
yeah.
that uncommon. And the key again is to be open and learn and be as as accurate as you can possibly be. And again, healthcare is a little bit unique in that regard. In this area, it's a little bit unique. And we complain about the cost of healthcare. But if you went to the grocery store, and they said a loaf of bread is $2.50, but to this guy, I'm going to sell it for a $1.25. And then there's 4 different organizations I got to go through to get paid for that. And every one of them has a whole, staff of experts who, from their, little angle and perspective, influence. I mean, it would cost $10 for a loaf of bread.
Yeah, and then when you're done,
get me going on the healthcare system, because
Yeah,
that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, we won't. And then when you're done, you're going to get sued for everything, right? And
Yeah.
So okay. So now let's do this.
Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead. I was going to say, you're at this company, you're at this organization. Then you mentioned that they originally said, the sky's the limit, you can grow at the company. And then they're putting these discriminatory laws in place where you have to check these boxes or you can't have these positions, which is wrong. There's one race, the human race. There's different nations, there's different cultures, there's different backgrounds, but the most qualified individual should get the position. So you're in this company and you were saying they start putting discriminatory practices in place. Where does it go from there?
So, yeah, and I don't want to speak ill of the organization, because I don't think that's not me, I guess. But
no, just focus on your story. But that's a reality part of your story.
And so from my perspective, again, so this is my perspective, right? Which is, I've got my own biases and all that stuff. So from my perspective, it started to become less and less comfortable. I didn't enjoy, well, I had enjoyed working there, and I enjoyed the people that I worked with, which I still did. I felt like it wasn't going to be a place that I was going to be able to continue to work at, enjoy, and grow, and do the, move in the direction that I wanted to move. And that's unfortunate. And I remember the attorney, I don't know if he wants me to mention his name, but he's a wonderful man. He is an Alaska native, very thoughtful. We would, work until 5 or 6 or whatever. And then I'd go by his office and say, well, what do you think about this? And then we'd end up talking until 7 o'clock about a legal aspect or, whatever was going on. And I asked him about this. I said, I can see a Native American organization wanting to provide opportunities to Native Americans to better their lives and have opportunities for employment. I mean, I can see that. That makes perfect sense to me. But if I love somebody, I want them to do that by working with those individuals to become the most qualified person for that, whatever the role is. And that seems like that develops the individual, as opposed to giving them something because of their race. And we had long conversations about the legality of it, right? You could never do that in any other organization, because that is blatantly discriminatory. But because of some legal precedent, which we won't get into all the details, and I don't know all the details, this is allowed, and it's legal in a Native American organization. And so I had a fundamental difference of opinion about how you would implement this to move forward, a part of our purpose, which is to advance and help Native Americans and Alaska Natives, which I absolutely, that's one of the reasons I went to work there, because I wanted to be a part of that. So anyways, this became increasingly uncomfortable. And people say they don't leave an organization, they leave their supervisor. You've heard that. So
yes,
this,
very
my
much.
Stepdad, which we talked about earlier, who I've grown to love dearly. My mom had passed away too young, and he had retired. He was on vacation, right? So you're retired, and now he's on vacation. So he was in Seattle. He went to Ivar's, his favorite seafood restaurant. And he was, downtown there, and he slipped or tripped or fell. Oh, I don't know exactly what happened. Hit his head badly, evidently, was in the hospital. And, somebody got a hold of me because he had his contact information and said, hey, your dad is in the hospital in Seattle. And my mom is gone. My brothers are far away. And so me and my uncle both went down to Seattle.
And just to interject, for people who don't know geography, even Americans, Alaska to Seattle, it looks close on a map, but it's far. I mean, that's like, was it 3,000 or 3,500 miles?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's like
several thousand miles.
It's like going coast to coast, like Boston to LA. I mean, it's a long flight.
Almost, yeah. It's a long flight. So we flew down, and tried to get things settled, and I had to go back to work. But then he had like a downturn. And this is a long story in itself and a whole nother lesson in healthcare and whatnot. But I ended up flying back down. And I remember coming back from being in the hospital with my stepdad, and my boss, who had many redeeming qualities, but basically saying to me, how come you didn't get the board report in sooner? I said, well, my dad's in Seattle and he's in the hospital. And I had to go down because there's nobody else, me and my uncle, that are managing this. And he never once asked, well, how's your dad doing? Or how are you doing? Or how are you dealing with this? Or any personal empathy. And he may not even realize this. I don't know what pressures he was under, or what other things were going on. I just don't know, right? I don't know what I don't know. But I know from a personal perspective around this time that I became quite depressed. And I would honestly say for the first time in my life, because my work is important to me. I always put 110% into my work. And I felt like this man, who's my boss, didn't care about me at all. And
you're spending the best part of your day with him, even over your family. I mean, you're there long hours, the best part of the day, and this person doesn't appreciate you or value you.
Yeah. And we had done wonderful things there. I mean, really not easy things necessarily, but we had done really good things, really good work. I had made tremendous progress. Anyways, I felt really good about the work that I did and that I was a part of, that we all did. And I had about 200 employees myself, and out of 1,000 at the organization. And, there were so many good things happening. And anyways, and so I found myself depressed. And I actually, for the first time in my life, went and talked to a counselor. And you know what? If you feel that way, if you feel that kind of darkness, that kind of apathy almost, I think even though you're a white middle-aged male, you got to reach out and take a dose of, I could use some help. And I got some counseling, and I realized that, and in my book, I didn't think about this way at the time, but in my book, I say sometimes you got three generic ways you can move forward. And you have to move forward one way or another. You cannot remain stuck in a situation that is bad. You just can't, because it's not healthy. It's not going to serve you well mentally, physically, professionally, personally. Any way you look at it, it's not going to serve you. And so something as big and important to you as that, you kind of either zoom in. So zoom in means, you're going to look inside. You're going to try to maybe bring in some internal resources to move things forward and make things better, right? So you can zoom in. You can zoom out, which means I can't do it myself. I got to get some outside help, right? And so I got some counseling as a way to get some outside help. Maybe some perspective, maybe some resources, whatever it is, you might have to zoom out. And sometimes when those aren't working, you might have to make the decision, I just got to zoom away. And I finally came to the conclusion this was not going to change in any reasonable time frame. I was miserable enough that, and again, this is me personally, I just got to zoom away, and I left. And it was a good decision for us. Not an easy decision, but a good decision. And I'm not saying somebody else in the same situation, that would be the right thing for them, right? But for us, given all the things going on, that was the right decision to make. And actually, for me, it was just like huge relief. And I loved the people that I worked with there, and I had lots of great relationships, but just overall, it had become the wrong place for me. And I just couldn't be happy there. So that was a good thing. So I zoomed away and went on to do some really fun, amazing things, you know, over the next, say, 10 years of my career.
Yeah. So talk to us from when you left to now, what transpired in these months, years?
So then I went down and I went to work for a county. So another new experience for me. So this was government. I'd never worked in government before. So county government. And they hired me. This was a healthcare organization. Well, the healthcare part of the county government. It was, I'm going to step back. So the county operated a community health center as a part of county government. It's a rather unique model of federally qualified health center, which is where I had actually started my career, at a community health center in Seattle. And so they had planned to close the health centers, but the community rose up in arms and said, "What are you doing? We need these services in our community. This isn't okay. You need to pull back from that." And they'd in fact closed 2 of 3 locations when they realized, okay, well, and given away, well, anyways. And so they said, "We're going to retract this. We're going to go back to having this, and now we need to grow it because there's all these needs that aren't being met." And so they hired me to be like, I don't remember what my title was, like a director or executive director or something, you know, within the county, working under the Health, Housing, Human Services division. And I started working with just primary care and dental, and we had the one location. I think we had a school-based health center as well. You know, we went through a mission, vision, values process. We looked at our fundamentals. We looked at our finances. And I was learning kind of how county government works. I had the honor and privilege of working intimately with team members or peers who were in like behavioral, specialty behavioral health, public health, housing, et cetera, et cetera. And that was really fun. And we did really well. And we really had this wonderful vision that we were pursuing together, good relationship with county government and with our independent board of directors, which an FQHC has to have. And we did, oh gosh, we grew, we created a wonderful new health center. We opened a couple of school-based health centers. We had the first reverse integrated health center that I was aware of. And this was where a group of people which have persistent, chronic, and fairly intense mental illness, so that their mental health is the biggest barrier to their physical health, right? I would call it an SPMI population. And for these folks, they die 30 years younger than the national average, largely because their mental health challenges preclude them from taking care of their physical health challenges. And so we developed, and this was really before I got there, I just helped it to evolve and grow, so I can't take too much credit for this, but it was a thrill to be a part of it. We developed this clinic that said, we are going to specifically set up this health center around you and your needs. And your primary needs are mental, but we're going to put some physical help as a part of a continuum of services to help you specifically with your needs and your situation as an individual. And it was super successful. super well received. And I didn't have enough data yet, but I'm convinced that if we were to look at the data, say today, that we would have lengthened the healthy lives of these individuals significantly by a decade or more, simply by aligning the health system around their needs instead of saying, well, you got to go here for this and there for that, and too bad that, this is too difficult for you. And so we just did some really cool things, and cool enough that eventually the county said, hey, Dave, under your leadership, we want to bring the specialty behavioral health in. We're going to bring the business functions in, which have been separate divisions. And we combined these divisions into one community health division to help move forward this expansive, inclusive sense of what health and healthcare and the health system should be. And it was a wonderful experience. So why did I leave? People want to ask. And so what happened, quite frankly, was we went from this supportive, expansive, growing, meeting the needs, engaging the community, partnering with hospitals, partnering with community organizations, partnering with all of these partners of the whole person lives of all our patients and our clients. And then there was a sweep of county commissioners, and the Tea Party candidates kind of took over county government. And literally overnight, we went from this expansive, take risks, try things, to don't spend any money, don't grow, don't, pursue this vision. And kind of, I got to this point again where I realized I went deer hunting in October, and I realized I've become miserable again, and life is too short to be miserable at work. And I went back and talked to my boss or my bosses, and I said, I'm miserable and this is what's going on. And they said, I understand that. And on, I think, good grounds, we agreed that I would leave. I think I was ruffling feathers, and I was, not that I'm an abrasive person, but I just wasn't fitting in as well as I might have. And so I left, and then I went to work with a little bit of interim, which was probably less important, but in the mid-Columbia Gorge for a federally qualified health center there. And I just had another marvelous experience. They had a challenging history with their finances. We were able to come in again, go through a process of kind of reaffirming what is our purpose, our mission, what are our values. To me, that's very, very important, because if we don't have our foundations built and that we're not on the same page on what those foundations are, anything else we want to do becomes exceedingly more difficult. So whenever I'm coming in as a new CEO or a new leadership role, I strive to go through this process so that we're all on the same page. And I don't think it would matter if I was for profit or not for profit or, whatever else. Having those fundamentals is really important, because we have to build on those things, and they have to be strong and robust. And that's important for us in our personal lives as well. And that's what my book is about, and frankly. But so anyways, we built these foundations. I have a good business sense, so we developed a very strong kind of business plan that supported our mission and our strategies. And we evolved, and past 3 or 4 years, we had our original health center that we had tremendously outgrown, years and years before. Some of the providers that had been there for a long time, over a decade, said, Dave, we've been full out of here for 10 years. And, we kept putting people in closets and expanding into the HVAC room and, storing supplies above the heater. And all this crazy stuff to try to fit, because people loved working at the organization and people loved coming to receive health services there. So we had this opportunity. Finally, we were in a financial position. We had the right, everything else in place that we could replace it with a new, ended up being about a $16 million health center, about 40,000 square feet. totally designed from a facility perspective around you as a whole person. You were the center of the care team, you as the patient. So David, when you come in, I expect you to operate as the captain of your own healthcare. And you might have a primary care provider, you might have a mental health provider, you might have a dentist, you might have a community health worker, you might have a case manager, you might have whatever these other services that they wrap around you and your needs. And you may only need one of them at a time, or two, or three, or five, or whatever, right? Depending on you, where you're at, your own situation. And that's what the model was built on. We built the facility with the absolute best practices that we could find, things like biophilic design, which is this bringing nature into the organization, so that when you walk in, even though you don't think about it consciously, subconsciously, you have this relaxing moment. Because we come into a typical healthcare setting because we're sick, or we're tired, or we're depressed, or we're anxious, or all of the above, or a family member is. And so we wanted to, from the very get-go, design this experience that causes and helps you to relax from a subconscious level then to the conscious, from operations and practices and policies and all that stuff. So we had wonderful people, we had wonderful staff who were caring, they understood our populations that we served. We had good information systems, so the technology was good. But as we were implementing the designing and then started building this, I realized, something was bothering me. And I had this epiphany as I was studying change models, and there's a number of different change models. But what I realized was common to all of them as a fundamental level was personal or intrinsic motivation. And I use the words, to be the captain of your own life. So this intrinsic motivation, it includes your values as a foundation. It includes what they call self-efficacy, which is the exercise of control, getting things done, if you will, and self-compassion, which is a sustainable, positive way to build self-esteem and self-compassion. And to create connection and balance. And so these three foundations are what composes our personal or intrinsic motivation, our drive. And if they're done in balance, right, it becomes sustainable throughout your life. And I realized that unless we could help the patient to carry out this role successfully, that all the effort we put and all the money we put into all of these other elements or domains would have limited impact. And we wanted to have outrageously positive impact. And we did some really good things. One of the things I was most proud of was we studied clinical outcomes between our primarily Caucasian population and our Hispanic population, which is our largest minority population. And we saw that there were disparities in the outcomes. Now that's common everywhere in the country. So we said that isn't okay. That's not consistent with our mission and our purposes. We put a tremendous amount of effort through a lot of different efforts and in a lot of different areas, but we focused on it. We set goals around it. And by the time I left, we had and could demonstrate for 2 quarters that we had eliminated any disparities in impact in clinical outcomes between these 2 populations, which to me was absolutely amazing because you just never read about that happening in the United States. And it gave me hope that this can happen and that with this new model that we would do even better, we would even be strong and have more impact. So I feel like I'm dribbling on again. So anyways, I got fired from that job. That's a whole nother story. I didn't steal any money or do anything like that. I had a disagreement with my board. I failed, frankly, to do some of the things they asked me to do, and I failed to communicate what I was doing adequately, probably a combination of things, but anyways, I was let go.
And then how did you, anytime we're let go from a position, there's a lot of self-reflection that needs to take place and honesty. How
Yeah.
did you work through that process to get healed and free and be ready for the next step of life?
There's a couple of things I did. One of them was in my work and research, because I frankly went from working full-time at a job to working full-time at understanding personal motivation. And one of the things that I came across in my research is that, and while studying our common humanity, one of the elements of self-compassion is that in the United States, 50,000 people are fired every single day. 50,000 people. But when you are fired, you're only thinking about yourself, right? You're licking your wounds. You're wondering how you're going to pay your bills. Fortunately, we didn't have any debt other than our house because we learned from prior experience. And, you know, but one of the things that it helped me realize is that I'm not alone. And that most of the things that we experience in life that are challenging, like getting fired, we can learn from other people. You know, there's an amazing amount, I mean, absolutely amazing amount of resources available to us on how to deal with almost any situation you can imagine. So this idea that you're not alone, I think is really important, because you feel like you've got to bear the world on your shoulders, but you're not alone. Now, if you're a person who has faith in God, you have a wonderful additional kind of source of light and support as you work through the inevitable kind of grieving and then hopefully learning. And that's probably the second thing, is that I really tried to say, what can I learn from this? You know, how do I grow from this? A, so I don't reproduce it. And B, so that if somebody else is going through the similar situation, I can have empathy and have something to share with them and that would be helpful. And one of my own insights was that we had a lot going on. My personal life was busy. My spiritual life was quite busy. I was in a service calling at my church where I was going around and working with, you know, different communities, and that was busy. And, you know, this personal life is always busy, and maintaining your relationships and making sure those don't get out of whack, out of balance. Anyways, and then work was super busy because we had these huge projects like this new health center and other big projects. And I think I was exhausted and I was doing my best, but I was so tired, I didn't even realize how tired I was, that I wasn't able to, you know, take care of this really important relationship with my board that I needed to. And that was an important insight to me. And that I should have done a better job of working to balance that. And it was frankly a day late and a dollar short. But I had, anyways. So I think that was an important learning. So am I ignoring critical feedback from a stakeholder who in this case, you know, decides to hire or fire me? And I was ignoring some critical feedback from them. It was just, I had so many things on my plate. I didn't like the feedback. And so I didn't give it the credence and, you know, the time that I should have. And that was a mistake.
So from that moment to today, how did you learn to become the captain of your own life and move forward?
So one of the things that has helped me, and some of the stuff I think I've done throughout my life, or, you know, more and more over my life, as I've learned and grown, and, you know, if I could be 20 again, oh my gosh, but I can't, right? So, and that's okay. But that's not how we're designed. So in this research I did and studying and writing, I thought I would create a business that would help share these ideas, these principles that I adopted in my own life. So for example, values. I've always had values, But what I really learned through this research was that making my values explicit is super important. So it's not like saying, yeah, I believe in being honest and I believe in the environment and I believe in God, and that's okay. Really, this is a process. It's a simple process, actually, though, that anybody can go through, no matter what your background is, what you've done, what you haven't done, is to make your values explicit. So when I say that, what it means to me and what I think the research supports is that you have to sit down with like a list of values and you have to say, what are my top core values? This isn't the 25 things that I believe in, and there may be 25, that's great. But kind of when push comes to shove, if I had, and I think 5 is kind of a magic number, 5 values that I hold at my core, that no matter what's going on in my life, if I'm having relationship challenges, financial challenges, professional challenges, hobby, friends, clubs, whatever else you got going on, challenges, whatever else is going on around me, these are 5 things that are my core, that I hold on to dearly, and that I live my life consistent with no matter what. So one might be faith in God. So like my number one value that I hold above all the others is belief. I made a little, what do they call it? An acronym, Bitcoin, but without the oin. So it was easy to remember. So B is belief. And this is for me. Your values will be different, and that's okay. And that's good, in fact. But for me, belief or faith is fundamental to who I am and what's important to me in my life. And all the other stuff swirls around to me. My faith and my belief is always there. That value is fundamental and core. Integrity is a second value that I think is really, really important and critical. Transparency, so that's BIT, right? Transparency, and then compassion or charity. So the idea of we're all on a journey, we're all in a different place, we're all flawed, but we're all flawed in different ways based on how we're raised, choices we've made, experience of life. And so the fact that your flaws look different than my flaws makes you no better or no worse than me, and vice versa. And again, this sense, one of the principles is we're all a part of this common humanity. And so for me, these are fundamental values that I hold to no matter what. And we all need to come up with that. And then we need to say, what does that mean, right? What does it mean to say faith and belief? And I have to describe that. So what does that look like? What does it sound like? Why would my life be better by living that value? And if we do these things, our values become this living, breathing life, kind of like woven in like the fabric of like a quilt or a Afghan or whatever a metaphor, where everything is, woven together like a piece of fabric. And so it becomes inextricable, undividable from who you are. And it affects everything that you do in your life. And that begins, and I wrote a couple of things down. The science, the research behind it, is that it gives meaning to your life, right? Which is an antidote to apathy. It provides well-being, which is the sense of my life is okay, my life is on track, which is an antidote to languishing. It provides clarity to your life, which is an antidote to fuzziness, like, well, should I do this or not do this? Do I, pursue that? Do I, it just gives you clarity. And it gives you focus, which helps you avoid regret. So this is one of the 10 principles that I think if we all just did this and made our values explicit, how different life would be, how much more powerful and grounded our lives would be, and how, what a wonderful thing that would be. And that's why it's chapter 1 of my book.
Amen. Now let's do this. Between your story of birth through today, is there anything we missed that you want to cover before we move into where's David right now and where are you heading?
Oh my gosh. No, I don't think so. Yeah.
Okay. Then where are you today and where are you going so we can help you get there?
So today I am trying to make a living as an author. So, I wrote my first book. I don't have a big following or anything, but I feel, as I have throughout my life, in my career, I'm trying to pursue my values and my purposes. And now as an author, and perhaps as a consultant or as a partner with organizations. And so I wrote the book based on these 10 principles that I discovered. I didn't create them. I'm not like the genius behind these or anything like that. But something that you get better as you get older is taking disparate knowledge and creating connections that create a stronger woven base or foundation or understanding, hopefully some illumination. And so, it starts with your values, awareness and feedback. So we talked about awareness a little bit and, kind of being self-aware. Feedback, our relationship to feedback. People don't think about it that way, but we all have a relationship. Learning, intent, and, and it goes on, and I have all 10 principles. And it ends with common humanity and mindlessness. And I titled that last chapter Mindlessness because so many people have this bias when I say we should all be mindful. And they think I need to start eating yogurt and wear yoga pants and learn a foreign language. If I'm not Ayurvedic, I'm not cool. And they don't know what Ayurvedic is or the background of it. And so they just go, I'm close to that. I don't want anything to do with it. I saw a Dr. Phil interview, a while back, and he said, yeah, mindfulness. And my clients go, woo, 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 like you're crazy. Well, that's a goofy stuff. And of course, mindfulness, maybe there's a lot of history in it in India and in certain belief backgrounds. And there's a lot of value to that. But for most average people, I try to describe it, and because my book and my work is oriented towards average people, is that mindlessness is the chapter title. We look at that, and so far people go, well, what do I, how do I interpret that? And in the first chapter, I say, you have a mind. You know that you do, and every single person does. So it cannot be the fact that you don't have a mind. And what it is simply the fact that you haven't been open to this point in using your mind to your own best benefit. And so the chapter is mindlessness, but the point is you have a mind. So what matters in your life is how you're using that mind to your own positive effect. And I don't use any fancy words. You don't have to wear yoga pants, but you know what? If you like yoga pants, go for it. And if you know about Ayurvedic, go for it. Or, any of the other disciplines or philosophies that get into that in a lot more detail, good for you. But for most of us, just the idea that I don't want to be mindless because I have a mind, why would I waste the most amazing thing, as scientists have described, in the entire universe? The human mind is the most complex, most amazing creation in the universe. More than the sun or the planet or gravity or any of the natural laws, that circle around us. Our mind is so amazing. So let's use it to our good and our benefit. And there are simple practices that we can do so that we think. And fundamentally, the more we think, the more we're going to be the captain of our life. And if we can just have that introduction, and people can be slightly open to, okay, I don't have to learn something fancy or weird or foreign, but yeah, I want to use my mind, and we can become open to it. And we start very little simple steps, and then we grow from there. And it's like, I use the metaphor of a fruit tree because, I worked in cherry country in that rural community in the mid-Columbia Gorge. And what we try to do, and so much of what we find in our internet and, YouTube and all this stuff is how to do stuff, right? Anything you want to do, you can go out and find a YouTube or 1,000 or 10,000, some good, some middle, and some bad on how to do whatever it is we want to do. But what happens is, if we look at a tree, you got roots, you've got the trunk, and then you've got the tree with the leaves and the branches and the fruit. And what we do is we focus on the fruit on the top. We go, I want a big harvest, right? I want lots of outcome. I want lots of results. And so we focus on tips, tricks, hacks, techniques, how to, and we focus on building this. But what happens with far too many of us is we fail to build the trunk and the roots. So in nature, we know that the outcome of that inevitably is that there's not enough root strength, there's not enough nutrition, there's not enough trunk strength to support what we've got going on up here, and we fail, right? In nature, there's a rainstorm, the roots are small, the tree falls over. There's a windstorm, the tree falls over. There's less rain than you need, there's a drought, then you've got weak roots and weak roots and trunks, and there's not enough to generate any harvest. And so what I prescribe, if you will, is that we live our lives in balance, and that we develop the root and the trunk. So those are our foundations, and that the stronger they get, then the natural outcome, without a lot of other effort, is that we have a great harvest. Given the situation, environment that we're in, where we maximize, if you will, we optimize our harvest by focusing on becoming a person that naturally and normally generates those bounteous, abundant results. But when we focus on the results and ignore the becoming part of our lives, then we find what happens is burnout, depression, stress, and aspects of our lives break because we're not in balance. Relationships break, work breaks, education breaks, whatever all these various domains in our lives are, they're stressed. And so we have to do these things in balance. And if we can do that, then it just kind of flows. And that's kind of where I hope I'm at today. I'm learning and I'm growing. I'm doing the right things. I'm building my foundations, strengthening my foundations, so that the natural result of that in my business life is that I have a wonderful, bounteous harvest. But I'm not focused on the tips and tricks. I mean, you got to be wise. You got to do good business. But I'm trying to build my foundations and grow those together. It's a slower process. Sometimes that's frustrating to us, right? Because all the stuff out there says, do this and revolutionize your life in 60 days or, in 6 months or whatever. Well, you know what? I probably have 30 years left to live, is what I figure. And you're a young man. I look at you and I go, you're a young man. You probably have, if you take care of yourself, right? Live a life in balance, mentally, physically, spiritually, relationship. If you remain in balance, you've easily got 60 years of life left. So be patient.
I don't know if I want that much life yet. I want to go home and see Jesus.
Well, believe me, every day is precious. And the key is that you grow into it, right? And I promise you that if you grow into that imbalance in 60 years, you'll go, I am so grateful. And I love every day. And I accept that I'm mortal and this is going to happen. But in the meantime, every day is a joy. Every day is an opportunity. And that's a beautiful way to live your life, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree. So now, David, if someone wants to get a hold of you, to talk to you, to explore the concepts we spoke today about more, to get some coaching, what's the best way for one of our listeners to reach you?
So my website is probably the easiest thing, davidredwards.com. And if you just Google David R. Edwards, there's a wonderful man who just passed away last year who was a Welsh frontman for the Welsh punk rock group Dagly Blue or something like that. So he got the first page of Google results, at least for now. I hope I make it on the front page, within a year. That's one of my goals. But again, I'm not focusing on that. I'm focusing on all the things I need to do so that when somebody searches in Google, I rank. So it's not the goal per se. It's all the foundations that will naturally and normally, inevitably lead to that kind of an outcome that I seek. Anyways, so if you put in daviredwards.com, I should hopefully, I should come up. And then you can reach out to me on that. Yeah, if you look it up on your phone, I'd be fascinated.
I take notes on my phone when we're recording. So if anybody's watching the YouTube video cast and you see me on my phone, like I was telling David before the episode, I'm not surfing the web. I'm taking notes for the episode.
There you go.
It's an integration I built like for the podcast. So this is what it's all about. I got my notes right there through the website. So it's
awesome.
But we will put you down under David R. Edwards. We'll make sure we do our best. I have so many guests that tell me that our podcasts come up before their own website in internet searches. So now I have a little bit of challenge on my end. I'm looking forward to it. Question is this to finalize the show. If you had one parting thought, one last thing you want to leave our listeners with, I'm going to ask you that in a second. The next thing, though, I want to say is this. When I was reading your acronym, you had, BITC. And I was thinking, I was laughing, not at what you were saying, because you're saying Bitcoin. And I'm thinking remember that old phrase that was very popular, life's a bitch?
Yeah.
Like you could do some kind of funny, like instead of, you said charity or compassion. So you could have C as charity, and instead of compassion, do humanity. And your acronym could be bitch. Life's a bitch. So I don't know if you'll ever use that, but that's why I was laughing when I was looking at my notes, because that was what my sick marketing mind was thinking.
There you go.
Anyways, from your thoughts, though, what's the final thought you want to leave with our listeners to farewell and close down this episode?
So I think if I had a final thought, it is that your life is important. No matter what's going on in your life, we're all in whatever our situation is right now. Your life matters. It is important, and it's worth your effort to put into it to have the best life that you can. And I invite you to become the captain of your life. If you're not religious or Christian, to me, that means that you are in charge of what's important to you. You have to understand what your values are. You decide how you're going to move forward or not. But from the foundation of your life is important, and it matters. It matters to you, and it matters to those that are close to you, and it matters to everybody around you, because we are inseparable from the environment around us. We affect each other, we impact each other. So your life matters, and I invite you to become the captain of your life. If you're a Christian, that might mean that you say, I give my life to Christ. But what does that mean? Be explicit about it. Be purposeful about it. Be intentional. And that's why on your foundation of values, the second principle is really about, it's about awareness. It's the fourth principle is about what is your intent, Be intentional. Don't let the random forces of the world around you, the 3,000 images that you're exposed to every day, some of your own choosing, many not, don't let those run your life. Your life is more important than anybody's marketing slogan or anybody who wants you to do this or become that or invest in that. I promise you, from my at least limited perspective, that if we just created our lives and our expectations based upon the things that we see around us, we'd all want to drive a Bugatti while be on vacation all the time, eating, drinking, fattening foods and addictive substances while being slender and beautiful and popular. Because that's what the world tries to sell us as important. But I'm going to suggest to you that none of those things are what is important. What is important is that you are in charge of your own life, and that if you decide to give it to something or to someone, then you do it purposefully, with understanding, with intention, and then that you build your life on that, and that you're in charge.
All right, David. Well, thank you so much. And while we were speaking about 2/3 through this episode, again, if you're watching, I'm sorry, but my camera shut off. So we had to switch to the laptop camera, and I'm talking to Dave, and you're probably totally confused, but that's what happened. My camera broke mid podcast. So
no.
like Dave was saying, become the captain of your own life. Check out his book. We'll put a link in the show notes. If you want more information, reach out to him. And other than that, Dave, thank you for being on the podcast today. This is a great bonus episode we're going to share with our community. And if you need anything else, my friend, please reach out. And for our community and our friends all over the world, like our slogan says, don't just listen to this great information from Dave, but do it, repeat it, so you can have a great life in this world and an eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. That was our friend, David R. Edwards. And we wish you the best, and we'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.